the lowest time preference individuals concern themselves with eternity.
You know, the rabbit hole also never ends when you look inwards at your own corruption and sin.
When Kennedy was up there quoting Lowry, that had me and my buddy Mike tripping.
I think Trump is probably going to embrace Bitcoin.
This is the but maybe chart.
I thought the bond market was going to collapse 80%. I think if you're viewing things priced in Bitcoin, then that starts to shift the conversation from greed to fear. Omega candle kind of stuff is from fear, not from greed.
The 4-year cycle is mostly a psychological phenomenon. Once most of the economic energy has come out of your network, it's like 30% in, 50% in, it's like boom, it happens slowly and then all at once.
You know, one of the things unique about the Titanic that was so tragic about it is that they had so much time to actually get people to lifeboats.
It's this weird thing that happens when price rips. I like get sad. You want to use the absolute minimum necessary force. You don't want to like whack people over the head with something. If we were on the Titanic and you were listening to the orchestra in the theater, I would like throw you over my shoulder and drag you out.
I think it's okay to accept that most people, when they hear things they need to hear, it's not what they want to hear, and so they're not going to listen to it. If Americans were to zoom out and realize what's actually going on, that's essentially what we're doing with fiat money. That means that we've effectively stolen from the developing world and imported it to the developed world without actually having to move raw materials.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the best proxy for power is money. When you give somebody limitless access to unearned power, you give them limitless corruption. If we so choose as a human collective to take that one ring of power that is the money printer that people use to subjugate others rather than to engage in play, engage in consensual relationships, we have the opportunity to cast it into the fires of Mordor by adopting Bitcoin. Or if we're not oriented properly, we could miss it. Who's to say that we couldn't have a digital dark ages, so to speak?
Working in Bitcoin is like fighting World War III 30 years before it happens. Probably over the course of the next 20 years, you know, we're going to have 100 million people die from fiat inefficiency that don't have to die.
If we're able to get through this fourth turning without that violent conflict, the probability of that is very low, you know, from a historical perspective, but I think we've got the best shot at it of any of those times right now. So there's that responsibility that we have, and the sooner the better, man. People talk about Bitcoin wasting energy, and it's like, listen, if the electrical energy put into this can be a substitute for bloodshed that we've previously been using to establish the chain and custody of scarce resources, then like, this is not a waste, man. There's a lot of things Bitcoin doesn't fix. How do you personally guard against Bitcoin becoming an idol in your life?
I do everything I can to stay on the path, right? So when you try to tell someone about Bitcoin, really what you're saying to them is I love you in a indirect orange way.
So for people who are newer to this, you know, you haven't missed it. Hey everybody, and welcome back to JRP. Today I'm joined by the great and powerful, the intelligent and eccentric, the suave and tenacious. That's it. That's all I'll give him. Luke Broyles. It's great to have a chat with you, man. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, happy to. You gave me too much. Yeah, appreciate it though. We first met in Nashville back in July 2024. Right? I think it's where we first met.
Yeah, well, I was standing in line with my buddy who I was working on the What Is Money show with, and you walked up, and I was like, "Hey, yo, you know, I think we had you scheduled for the next day."
Yeah, we did meet in line. Yeah, we were supposed to meet the next day, but I forgot that we met in line. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I remember you being like, yeah, I was up all night thinking about this. You had a dinner with Saylor the night before, I think, and you're like, I've been got these things running through my mind, you know, and I don't know, I got the impression that I was like, man, this guy, his brain just runs, man. His brain's just running all the time, you know. But
yeah, which is good and bad. But it runs a lot. Yeah, no, yeah. I didn't have dinner with Michael the night before. That was recently before that. Yeah, obviously he was too busy in Nashville, you know, with Trump and everyone there. But yeah, definitely that was a very exciting weekend because people didn't know what was going to happen. And the Kennedy thing was shocking. To me, it was shocking, and the Trump speech was surprising. I think the actions they've done since the conference, especially, have been very intriguing. I'm surprised. I'm surprised how much has happened, and we will see what happens over the course of his presidency. Round two.
Yeah, it does. Seems like some stuff's happening quick, man. When Kennedy was up there, kind of like, I mean, he was just like quoting Lowry, basically.
Right.
He was pulling stuff straight out of software, and I was like, no, that had me and my buddy Mike tripping. We were sitting there watching that, like, no way, man, this guy sounds like a hardcore, done his research, lost his mind Bitcoiner. Which is interesting, because I talked with him. So he was on the show. It was right after I got to Miami. He was working on the show, and we had a talk for like 45 minutes before we were actually started recording. And and I remember at the time being like, thinking like, he kind of gets it, and when I was talking with him, I wasn't trying to like sell him on, I wasn't trying to sell him on like, here's how the protocol works and here's why it's, whatever it was. I just kind of shared like my personal experience. I was like, yeah, I'm 29 years old, and for the most part, I did a little bit of investing before that, but for the most part, like, this is the financial ecosystem that I know, and the rest of it is foreign to me. Like, not that, like, this isn't like this new thing to me. It's like, this is what I know well, and it's kind of more or less all I've ever known. I was doing some other investing before that, but yeah, we had a conversation. I could tell at that point in time he was kind of still wrapping his head around some stuff, and it wasn't that long ago. It was less than a year ago, and then see him up there like, we're going to buy 4 million Bitcoin, and just the verbiage that he was using, you could tell it's like, oh, this guy's, when he said, like, I don't view myself as like red or blue, I view myself as orange, and he was like, this is, his allegiance to it. It was like, oh, okay, it sounds like it's showtime.
Yeah, the moment he said, I'm not red or blue, I knew he was going to say orange. So it was funny because he dragged it out, was a little dramatic with it. So it was, it was very, it just took me completely off guard, because I think most people thought, oh, he's going to talk for like 30 minutes, then he'll make one announcement in the last 90 seconds or so and end on that wave. But it was a complete opposite. He made an announcement way bigger than any of us thought he would. Granted, all of us knew that he wasn't going to get elected, right? But still, it's a big shift to the Overton window. I mean, Kennedy's one of the best candidates for or most widely popular candidates for president, in the last decade, right? I mean, it's pretty much Kennedy and Bernie Sanders, besides Clinton, Biden, and Trump. We knew, everyone knew that he was going to probably drop out at some point or be absorbed into some other campaign, which obviously he was, into the Trump campaign. But it's still a shifting of the Overton window, which is why I was still very excited to hear that, because I knew that whatever he's saying, it's probably not going to become policy directly from him, but he has a sway. And when he came out, not at the end with this minor announcement, but within the first basically 90 seconds, 120 seconds, with a way higher conviction announcement than I think anyone expected, that was like, that was genuinely a shocking moment for me.
And you got to wonder what 4 years from now is going to look like too. We've got 4 years of the Trump administration, and I'm cautiously quite optimistic. Cautiously optimistic. But most people, if I told them where I thought things were going to go in the next 4 years, they'd be like, "You're crazy," and I don't think I'm wrong. But we'll see. But yeah, 4 years out from that, and then I think Kennedy's got to be one of the top candidates for candidacy after this administration. While we're at it, I might just skip ahead a little bit from what I told you.
Go for it.
We'd rock over, but so this photo was making the rounds just a couple days ago. Eric Trump, with Michael Saylor. For the audio listeners, it says
Yep.
two friends, one passion, Bitcoin. You've talked a lot about MicroStrategy and what Saylor's been up to. What do you make of this? What's your impression of what's going on between the Trumps and Saylor, and where do you think they're at right now with this?
Yeah. Well, I think MicroStrategy is honestly, it's a bit bittersweet, because MicroStrategy is not Bitcoin, but people really love the MicroStrategy content. Honestly, sometimes more than the Bitcoin content, which, I think is a trade-off, right? I mean, I think the big picture with MicroStrategy for the Bitcoin cycle is, I think this is the new altcoin. I mean, Ethereum has had 3 years down in a row. Solana's chart is looking a lot like Ethereum's over the last, 5 years or so. I mean, it's just, I don't see a lot of tokens that have a massive narrative for it. I mean, XRP, consistently has, I mean, like here we are 10 years later in the altcoin world, and the dominant ones are not new, right? It's like, XRP's been around a long time. Chainlink, Litecoin, Dogecoin. I mean, there's really nothing new. Because it's like everything that's new just keeps falling, and everyone keeps going back to the original. So my point is that, I think the altcoins will pump. I think they will. I'm increasingly doubtful that they follow a typical 4-year cycle, though. And I know some people will criticize me for being a little bearish here, but I'm going to continue to believe we have a 4-year cycle until we don't. At some point, we will go vertical, but I think Bitcoiners need to be prepared for a different kind of win than what they're expecting. I think most Bitcoiners want to say, "Oh, this time's different, super cycle, straight to the moon, no bear market." And what if we're wrong and that Bitcoin has a 4-year cycle? But what if what's different this time is that the altcoins fail? And so therefore, instead of an 80% bear market for Bitcoin, maybe we have a 40 to 60% or something, right? Like I think if we're having this conversation in 2027 and we're looking back and we say, Bitcoin only fell 55% and we didn't really have an altcoin mega cycle, I think that would be a massive win. And I think that would be a very healthy midpoint between one half of the Bitcoiners that are saying we're going to 1 million next year, and the other half of the Bitcoiners that are saying, we're only going to 185K or whatever, right? It's like, my point is that I think before Bitcoin melts up, the altcoins are going to probably melt down. And all that to say is I think MicroStrategy is the altcoin. I make a lot of content. I watch a lot of content and trends. And I mean, just the excitement, I think, is way higher around MicroStrategy than it is around these other tokens, which I think is justified. And I think, as I've said in content for years, I think we have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. And that's not just true technologically with the world, but that's also true with us individually. And I think it's true with Bitcoin too, which is why I say that, right? Because I don't like saying the future is going to be better or the future is going to be worse, because I don't know that, but I know no matter what, it's going to be more different. And I think MicroStrategy is a sign of that times that, all the degenerate gambling is probably transitioning from unregistered securities to Bitcoin securities. And I think MicroStrategy is probably the lead of the pack. I mean, we've had Bitcoin miners and proxy companies for a long time, but this is the first time where we're getting an actual major market cap company that's going to be in major stock indexes that has, major catalysts behind it. I mean, basically what Saylor's trying to do is create the best Bitcoin security in the world, right? So anyway, that's kind of a larger thought on it. I think that's a big sign of how difficult it is to reach one Bitcoin. Many people have a massive unit bias or anchoring bias with one Bitcoin. Hopefully people watching this have gotten to one Bitcoin. Probably many people watching this have gotten to 1, 5, or 10 Bitcoin. But, the reality is that most people, as much as we may or may not like it, most people aren't yet at the point where they're denominating in sats. And so buying a MicroStrategy share under, $300 sounds a lot better than, or buying 10 of those shares or 100 of those shares sounds a lot better than spending $100,000 to maybe get to one coin. Which again is not logical, but I'd rather than be buying MicroStrategy than XRP, right? So, anyway, all I have to say is I think that's what's really going on from the retail side. But obviously, I'm talking about the retail side because most people watching this probably are in retail. But obviously, the most important component of the story here is the nation state side.
What do you think is happening? Like, what sort of conversations do you think Eric Trump is having with Saylor? Do you see Eric's talk at Bitcoin Mina, right?
Yeah, that is one I want to watch and I want to react to. I've not watched that one yet. I've seen a couple clips of it floating around. But I'm well aware that he believes Bitcoin is going to 1 million. I'm well aware of the more bullish things he said. And I think it's real. I'm still personally pretty doubtful that Trump himself is quote unquote a Bitcoiner, and I still have doubts about other people close to the administration, right? Because we see different ordinal and altcoin and token launches and all that stuff, right? So we see that, to people that would cry and whine and complain that, the Trump's under altcoins or whatever. I think the important thing to understand is that, the bigger scam is the dollar, right? It's like, it's ridiculous to me that Bitcoiners complain about World Liberty, whatever it is, token that nobody uses, right? It's like, really, like, you're going to tell the people that are in charge of the political currency that runs the entire world that, anyway, I think it's just a bit funny because, well, yes, obviously they're into altcoins, right? The dollar's a pretty big altcoin, and as much as you may not like, Trump's ordinal project or World Liberty coin, right? Neither of those have ever bombed kids in a different country. So anyway, if we're talking about which currencies actually cause more pain, but we're not being, which that gets into a whole nother side of the conversation, going down into why I think that happens. But I think Trump's sons probably, to a very large extent, are either Bitcoiners or I think they'll become Bitcoiners pretty quick. They're young, they're opportunistic. And I think probably the most important thing with Trump is that he has a big ego. He has a big desire to leave a mark on the world, right? He wants to be remembered as the hugest, the bestest, right? And I think we're seeing that, ironically. People are laughing at this whole, I want to buy Greenland, we're going to invade Panama, we're going to have Canada as for state, right? It's like, I think it's partially a joke, especially the Canada part. I hope it is, for goodness sakes. And the how is more important than the what, right? It's like,
I think it's a Trump art of the deal thing where,
right.
I think it was Michelle Weekly.
Yeah. I mean, it's setting the bar really high. Yeah. So I think it's just that. Yeah. But I think he actually does want Greenland and Panama, and I think my point in saying that, I think it's partially for America. I think partially it's because he believes that Greenland and Panama are really important for American interests, and he's not wrong. I mean, the Chinese basically control both sides of the Panama Canal, and the most powerful influence in the Arctic's going to be the Russians, probably, right? If America and Europe do nothing with Greenland. So I think it's partially in America's interest, but I think the other side of it too is that personal ambition of knowing that I've got 4 years left. The media and politicians have come against me, and I want to give them a middle finger and leave my mark, and I want to be remembered more than all these other presidents, right? I want to be the best president in American history, right? That's what he wants to be remembered as. And so, I think all these attempts to make a mark are attempting to mark that legacy, which is not even partially for him; it's partially for his administration, right? I think he wants his sons or his running mate, JD Vance, right? I think he wants a lot of them to have continued, involvement in the government. And so, anyway, all it to say is that I think that is probably one of the most important things when it comes to that question of will Trump understand Bitcoin, is that I think Bitcoin is the ultimate meme for Trump, because everything's a meme, right? Trump is a meme, and the best meme of all is I secured America's future, right? I mean, the guy's literally orange, right? It's like, if you were to leave out, right, orange man, orange coin, right? If you were to leave office in 4 years with a couple million Bitcoin for America, I mean, whether that's good for America or not, whether that's good for Bitcoin or not, to him, I think it matters, but I also think it doesn't matter because I think he wants to be remember it is the guy that, did something bold, and Trump is.
I think that's a big point too. Doing something bold, like taking a risk.
Yeah, most people wouldn't do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pro-Trump people would say, oh, that's because he's brave. Anti-Trump people would say, oh, that's because he's, a megalomaniac narcissist or whatever, right? And I think both those things maybe are a little bit, maybe not the megalomaniac, but like I think you can praise or criticize that.
At the very least, quite narcissistic tendencies. He wants to be the hero, which
right.
Anyone that thinks they should be president, they're gonna have some of that probably,
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And my point is that it doesn't matter if you like it or not. The point is the only thing that matters is what's actually going to happen. I think that's what's going to happen. I think Trump is probably going to embrace Bitcoin at no small part because his sons are knocking over the head with it. And I think it makes perfect sense. Like if Trump were to understand that Bitcoin actually strengthens the US dollar, I think that is when it's game over and he decides to do it because Trump is focused on making the dollar stronger. That was his whole anti-Bitcoin thesis for years, was Bitcoin bad because Bitcoin competes with the dollar. We want a strong American dollar. I'm pro-America. We're the best, right?
It's going to be the same thing with nations. It's going to be the same thing where it's like, well, you should probably pick some up just in case. Like one, Trump doesn't want to get outcompeted. Two, when it comes to the survival of the dollar, it's like, well, just in case this is what everybody is going to be using in the future, just in case this becomes the next global reserve asset, you should grab a little bit, and then when you see that start, if you see the United States start that, like, I think things run fast. You would expect, because we have the most to gain, most to lose kind of thing in that transition. But if we're the first to jump, then every other country is like, wait, you guys are buying Bitcoin. And like, you have the reserve currency, like, hold on, I think that would have it shift really, really quickly.
Yeah, I think so. Right. I mean, I am super, super bullish. I think at the same time, though, I think what we're talking about here is a really, really big change. And so I do think it is entirely possible the dominoes fall super, super quickly. Right. I mean, and I think actually if they do fall super quickly, it's, it's funny. I make a lot of guesses and about half the people that follow me say I'm too bullish, the other half say I'm too bearish. So I guess my view is that, a lot of the hyper bulls are saying we're going to hit 1 million next year. I think that if what they're saying actually unfolds, I think 1 million is nothing. I think 1 million is bearish. I think we're going way higher than 1 million. But I do think it's going to take probably longer than we want. I think we're going way higher than we think, but I think it's probably going to take a bit longer, right? So maybe instead of 1 million next year, maybe it's 10 million if we're willing to wait a bit longer. But I mean, it is totally possible this thing just gets away from us. Until we start seeing that happen, I'm going to assume, that it's just a normal cycle, that we go up a bit in or a solid bit in 2025, that we probably have some correction. But, like I said earlier, I mean, there are different ways to have a super cycle, right? We may not just be vertical this next year. Like we may be moderately vertical, right? Do pretty well, and then have less of a crash. And I think that would still be a massive win. Like if we only had a 50% crash compared to an 80% crash, like, okay, it's okay. We didn't have an Omega candle. That is still, like, in my view, that's massive.
Well, it's an improvement. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well,
see.
yeah, it's different. I don't know if it's an improvement, but it's way different. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's less pain on the downside. I could see it going two ways. When you're talking about the repeating of the 4-year cycles, like I really can see the argument for this time is different. Trump, I don't think it didn't seem to me at the Bitcoin conference that he really got Bitcoin, that's for sure, but then also too, you saw RFK, hanging out with Ethereum, Dogecoin, whatever, he was like, he seemed to clearly not get it when I talked to him in April, I believe it was, and then by the Bitcoin conference in like August or something, whenever it was, maybe even earlier, it was like, oh, this guy gets it. And then you see Trump launches his shitcoin, and I remember I like tweeted something like Trump is a shitcoiner and a scammer, sad, like, and then a few months later, their rhetoric changes quite a bit, pretty quick. And then Trump, Eric Trump talking with Saylor, if there's anybody that's going to help you to understand what the heck is actually going on, he's the guy. And then so I could see the case for the super cycle here too, but why I see that this time is different case, but I can also see, like, I think it's mostly the 4-year cycle is mostly a psychological phenomenon. I think it's mostly you see it rip, you see people trying not to miss it, you see people leverage up. Like, I think that's why I think MicroStrategy could have a tough time in this at the end of this next top, because you have degens like me. I mean, I've leveraged my MicroStrategy position, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to deleverage early, and like, hopefully it all works out. It wouldn't be catastrophic for me if I don't nail it. I'm not like risking my entire portfolio, but how can you resist? Like he's borrowing money to buy Bitcoin. I'm borrowing money against my MicroStrategy position to buy more. And so, I can see, which, this is not financial advice. If anything that I've said,
obviously,
that is the most not financial advice of them all. But, so I see that where you have those, you have people leverage up, it's going up forever. And then you have a lot of people when everybody who doesn't understand Bitcoin is buying more Bitcoin than they should because they don't understand, then I think that's when you see people panic, and that panic sell that then causes that deleveraging event to where, like, I almost can't, like, it seems to me like that will continue until people understand Bitcoin, and we're like really, really far from like the general, like, gen pop understanding Bitcoin, essentially, so
right. Yeah, I agree. I do think this time will be different, but I do think people need to have their heads screwed on straight with probabilities, right? And I'm not saying that means that I'm right, everyone else is wrong. It just means that, it feels like in Bitcoin, there's only those two worldviews right now. Some people are saying 4-year cycle, exactly the same, doesn't change, blah, blah, blah. Human emotion doesn't change, whatever. And the other half of the people are saying $1 million next year, this is it, super cycle. And I don't know, I just have a hunch that we're going to look back and what we're going to see is pretty clear. We go up and up and up, and nation states are in. People think this is it. We're going higher. But then because nation states are sitting in profit and, major institutions are sitting in profit, people rotate out of it. Bitcoin starts to crash. We're down 40 or 50%. People are starting to say, oh my gosh, the super cycle people were wrong. They were all scammers. And this is a typical 4-year cycle. And then when people are expecting a 70% correction, boom, we stop. We stop at 50%, shock everyone. And then we, start trending back up a bit later, right? It's like, I think that kind of scenario would wreck the moon boys, that would wreck the 4-year cycle maxis. And, like, if we have had 4-year cycles, I think we are going to Omega candle territory. But in between there, I think we have to have at least one period of time that is a little more, moderate. Because it's like, I think we will have both. I think we will have those Omega candles where it only goes up, potentially even by an order of magnitude, and we obviously have had the 4-year cycles. That's factual. So anyway, my main point in all this is not to say people should listen to Luke and, oh, Luke has a market edge. He knows what he's talking about. I really don't. But what I am saying is that, I've talked to 1,000 people. My team of 40 people at the Bitcoin Advisor, we have literally, 8 to 10,000 conversations a year with Bitcoiners, ranging from every major country in the world to 5-figure to 9-figure net worths. I mean, it's like, in all kinds of businesses, and I'm just saying that's pretty much what I see. People fall in one of those two extreme camps, and I think that if we had something that was a really different cycle, but not in the ways people want, I think that would be, I think that would be maybe ironically the most likely, right? Everyone that wants to see a big crash so they can sell at the top and buy back lower, I mean, if you have half of the people acting on that assumption, and you have the other half of the people acting on the Omega candle assumption, well, then it seems pretty obvious to me that, okay, we're going to have a bit of demand when we go up. And okay, when we do crash 40 or 50%, we're going to have a bit of demand, people buying, at the low, right? So anyway, it's all speculation and none of it matters because the more important thing is where it's going. And, so pretty much all this has just been talking to the, people already in Bitcoin. But, I think the big picture where this is going is like this chart you've pulled up here of, what we're looking at, right? I think that orange line is maybe skewed to the right a bit too far.
This is the but maybe chart.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
this is probably not, but like but maybe.
Yeah.
SBR comes on. They RFK gets in there. It's like we need 4 million Bitcoin, which they'll never get. But
Right.
this is the but maybe chart. And the thing is, man, is that like you don't if you study hyperinflations that happen throughout history, like right before they happen, everyone's not like, here we go, the currency is about to hyperinflate. Like nobody thinks that.
Right.
And so I find it quite unlikely. I think that that I lean slightly more towards the camp of the continual repeating of the 4-year cycles that probably see less of the drawdowns. But we're about to find, like, this year will tell us a lot. That's for sure. The next few months are going to tell us a lot.
Yeah.
This reminds me, you did this video a while back that I sent to my brother. And my brother's like a commercial real estate dude. He's brilliant. He's just barely lately been coming around a bit to the Bitcoin thing, and I've been riding him for like 3 years now, but he's starting to figure it out, I'd say. But you did this video talking about how there was this thumbnail. It was like the bond market priced in Bitcoin, essentially. I'm thinking of it because it's
Oh yeah.
the chart we have here.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was like,
that.
It was essentially, I wonder if you could just maybe summarize a bit of that video if you remember it. You're sort of talking about like it's all about a matter of perspective. Everybody sees Bitcoin going up, but it's not really what's happening. Do you remember that well enough to kind of share the overall piece?
I said that many times. I mean, what I said in that video was I thought the bond market was going to collapse 80%. 80% in the next, I think, 3 to 5 years. Of course, the caveat being in terms of Bitcoin, right? Which sounds like a really bold prediction. Oh my gosh, the bond market's going to collapse 80%. But if you're pricing in terms of Bitcoin, that's actually a pretty easy prediction. All you're predicting is for Bitcoin to go up by a factor of 5. So, I think it all comes down to what that unit of account is, which, I think should be Bitcoin. I think if you're doing that, then I think becomes pretty clear the direction that's going on here. So, I think, I think that's really what's happening here, that we're watching everything collapse. Boom, 50%, 80%, 90%, another 80%, another 50%, another 90%. And, it will continue to fall down and down once Bitcoin's adopted. But, it's the big cost right now is the opportunity cost people are having in Bitcoin, watching things fall and degrade. And I don't know why that video in particular would have helped him better understand it. But I think if you're viewing things priced in Bitcoin, then that starts to shift the conversation from greed to fear. And I think that's going to be, I think this gets back to that 4-year cycle thing. It's the main reason why I think that the Omega candle, is probably going to be a lot bigger than we think, but it's going to be later than we think. It's because I think Omega candle kind of stuff is from fear, not from greed. I think Bitcoin 10x's in a year not when people are excited it's going to go to the moon, but when they start to panic, truly panic. And maybe they do this year, right? It's like, to your point, we don't know when that's going to happen. I have no idea when it's going to happen. The point is it's going to happen. I just think that the perception of Bitcoin being risk off is still a ways to go. I think we still need more time, which I know a lot of people, I'm just saying, I think what's probably going to happen is everyone's going to expect an Omega candle, massive wave of fear, or an Omega candle soon due to greed. And then it's not going to happen. And then people are going to say, oh, it'll never happen. And then it's going to be some fear-based event, right? If we're pricing bonds or whatever in terms of Bitcoin and we see that it's collapsing, we're on the defensive trying to preserve capital. If most people look at Bitcoin from terms of dollars, and so they're trying to be on the offensive to make more capital. So that's kind of my thought with it. But basically that's the reason why I reverse that, is because if you can just give people a different perspective and view Bitcoin not as an opportunity to grow their wealth, but as a necessity to prevent a collapse in their wealth. I think that's maybe not be a convincing argument, because most people don't view Bitcoin as that risk off thing, but it's enough to make them go, and that might stick with them.
Right. When you just approach it from that first principles, it's like not like drop what everybody, drop like the narratives that you've heard around this, drop these things. It's like, when the I often use the Titanic analogy. I think I remember in this video, I might have stole this from you or somebody else, but you talk about I've heard you talk about in that video, like you're like at sea level essentially, and everybody else is sinking, and then I use that Titanic metaphor a lot with people, where it's like the US dollar is just like the Titanic, where everyone's like, it can't sink, it'll never sink, like there's no way. And even when it strikes an iceberg and it's taken on a little bit of water, everyone's still sitting listening to the music in the place, and when it's taken on a little bit of water, everyone's like, no, it's fine, it's not going to sink. And when you're at sea level and you see it starting to sink, you might be yelling at people to get off or whatever it is, but the more water it takes on, the faster it sinks. And once that ship had enough, once it's like 30% in, 50% in, it's like boom, and it's the same way that it happens with currency. It was like once most of the economic energy has come out of your network, once people really notice it flowing, then it happens, slowly and then all at once, as is classically said.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, quite literally, right? It's you're spot on. Obviously, I'm going to agree with that because I've said it before. But it's actually quite literal. Like the Titanic, literally, like half the ship sunk in the last, I think it was 71 seconds, if I'm remembering right. But it was less than 2 minutes that the last half of the ship sunk. Right, like the ship. One of the things unique about the Titanic that was so tragic about it is that they had so much time to actually get people to lifeboats, right? When the Lusitania sank, I think it sank in 18 minutes, right? So, like the tragedy of the Lusitania is that, it was torpedoed and it sunk so quick that people didn't have time to get to the lifeboats, right? But part of the tragedy with the Titanic is that it took so long. There was so much time,
right,
for people to get off the ship. They just didn't have the lifeboats because, White Star Line was pretty cheap, and other factors too. But the point is that it took like the first hour, you basically couldn't tell the ship was sinking, right? Like even when the ship was sinking and lifeboats were being sent off the ship, people didn't realize that it was like doomed to fail and due to fail tonight, right? Which again is part of the ironic tragedy, is that it like sunk in the exact right time for max destruction. If it had taken longer to sink, probably the nearby ships would have made it to it. If it had sunk faster, then there wouldn't have been time to have lifeboats anyway, right? So it like sunk in the perfect time where it was long enough to give everyone the opportunity to use lifeboats if they had lifeboats, but still way too fast, to still be on the surface. So anyway, all I have to say is that that I think that's why they're powerful, because the more you learn about the actual event, the more you see just how that event is just such a culmination of humanity, right? A lot of it was greed, a lot of it was incompetence, a lot of it was negligence, and overreaction. Another ironic thing about the Titanic is that if the crow's nest had not seen the iceberg, ironically, the Titanic probably would not have sunk. If the Titanic had hit the iceberg head on, the ship probably would not have sunk. So in irony, so yes, everyone knows about the greed that, they were too cheap to put on the lifeboats. Everyone knows about, how they were trying to make record time to go to New York. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, the captain was going too fast. Everyone knows those things. But, it's very funny how with Bitcoin, in many ways, I think it's pretty similar. A lot of it's greed of why people are ignoring it because they're too distracted with other stuff. A lot of it's incompetence. And a lot of it is probably overreaction from people. And just like the Titanic, people will have years to get ready. It is so frustrating to me, in my own personal life. I've been talking about Bitcoin for years, and still to this day, basically nobody in my personal life has really gotten into Bitcoin. Not that they
Does
need
it
to
make
become.
you sad when price
Yes.
rips? Like, it's this weird thing that happens when price rips. I like get sad. I'm like, oh,
Oh
like
yeah.
I still have, like, I've too many loved ones on the Titanic. Like it's so
Right.
weird because you think like, oh, I'm getting, my net worth just doubled in the past 3 weeks. Like, how great is that? But I just get like I get like sick to my stomach sometimes. Like, oh, like maybe I should have said things differently. Maybe I should have. Just
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it's kind of classic stuff. I
Yeah.
wanted maybe shift gears. Go
Yeah.
ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. I was like, I used to be like that. I'm not like that anymore. I don't feel nearly as guilty, because the problem, like for you, Jake, the problem's not you. The problem's them, which I think,
Some of the time,
maybe hard to admit.
that's that it's true. It's true. In some sense, it's true,
No,
perhaps, but in
it is
some
a lot.
sense, I
Yeah.
do wonder, like, it's like there's always, there's always like things you could do better. Like there's times there's certainly things that I look back on talking with people where it's like, oh, maybe I could have done that differently, or like, because sometimes you get into like, an argument, and it's like you want to use the absolute minimum necessary force to communicate your point. You don't want to like whack people over
Right.
the head with something, especially if they're like disagreeing with you and getting wrecked in Satoshi denominated terms. You know what I mean? Like you gotta go, you gotta be gentle. You also gotta
Right.
lean in and be like, hey, I like care about you, and like the ship is sinking, and like I'm not gonna buy you any Bitcoin, but like, if we were on the Titanic and you were listening to the orchestra in the theater, I would like throw you over my shoulder and drag you out,
Right.
So like,
yeah, I don't know.
it's a tough thing to balance. Yeah.
I think I'd be a little bit more cold-hearted than that. As nice and friendly as I try to be online, I think I'd be a bit more ruthless than that. I really don't think that's the problem. I really don't think it's a logic issue. I mean, if the person believes in you, and they believe that you're intelligent, or they believe that you have their best interest at heart, then they would hear you out, right? Like, if they may not know how the ship is sinking,
people get psyops, man. People
yeah,
are
they may
like,
not
they think
care.
you're crazy,
Yeah, right. But
Which it
if you
gets
were
expressed
asking
that
them,
way.
yeah, but if you were asking them as a family or friend to get on the lifeboat, or at least hear you out, like they should. And so I'm not saying it to put anyone down, obviously, but I'm saying that to say that it's disappointing. Not that I think many Bitcoiners think, oh, my loved one doesn't understand Bitcoin from a logic perspective, and that may be true, but probably they never would, just because they don't have the interest. Many people just simply don't have the interest. But it's like,
Sure.
The biggest disappointment to me is that, man, either they don't think that I am average in intelligence, or they don't think I have their best interest at heart. If they believed either of those things, or both, either one of those things, right? If they thought I was altruistic, but stupid, they would still listen to me. And if they thought that I was brilliant but selfish, they would still listen to me, right? but the problem is that most people, most people, it's neither one, right? And again, I'm not saying it to say, oh, people should like me, but I'm just saying that I think many Bitcoiners give themselves a hard time when the person in their life isn't orange pilled, and I think it's okay. I think it's okay to accept that most people, when they hear things they need to hear, it's not what they want to hear, and so they're not going to listen to it. And I think that's true universally. Most people I tell about Bitcoin still have not bought Bitcoin. This is a side note here. I gave away about $500 worth of Bitcoin to my YouTube subscribers for Christmas. I made a little short, cute video about it, and I gave about $500 worth of Bitcoin away to family and friends. To like, $10 a piece for like 50 people or whatever, right? Really more people, because some people, gave $1 or $5, whatever, and I set it up so that the Bitcoin comes back to me in a month if they don't claim it. And, it's so ironic how, probably only about half of the Bitcoin I sent to the Bitcoiners was claimed, and not even $100 of the Bitcoin I sent to family and friends was claimed, right? Which, I mean, I don't know, like, I'm not strapped for cash necessarily, but shoot, somebody sends me $20, or even $5 or $10, I'm going to claim it, right? It's like, yeah, right. And
there we go.
yeah. So anyway, all that to say is that most people just don't want to put into 5 minutes of work to claim free money, right? And all, my big point here is that most people, when they are hearing something need to hear, but they don't want to hear it, there's nothing you can do. And so to me, what makes me sad is not, oh, I didn't do a good enough job of educating them. What makes me sad is they don't want to hear it. And more than anything in the world, I wish they would want to hear the truth, right? Most people I tell about Bitcoin are not going to adopt Bitcoin. Most Bitcoiners I tell about, get self-custody, get a multi-sig, get ideally an escrowed multi-sig, multi-jurisdictional, like I tell most Bitcoiners do that. Many of them listen to me, right? I mean, business is good, obviously, but most people in Bitcoin, most of them are still on exchanges, or they're still in a hot wallet, or they're still in a single sig, or they've memorized their seed. It's just Bitcoiners are not ready, right? Bitcoiners are not ready for their, couple coins, right? Half a coin, 1 coin, 5 coins, 10 coins. They aren't ready for it to go to 1 million. They think that they're going to be safe when they're walking around with 5 Bitcoin memorized in their head. And it's just, I just strongly don't think that's the case. Especially if you have other people in your life, wife and kids and all that, right? A lot of people think, oh, just keeping a seed phrase, wrapped in a discreet bag in my safety deposit box or my bedroom is like, oh, that's a good idea. And just, anyway, all it to say is that I think 90% of the normies I talk to about Bitcoin just are not going to listen to me for a decade until they've gone through pain. And I think, honestly, of the 45 or so thousand people that follow me online, I genuinely think 80 to 90% of them are going to lose at least a third of their Bitcoin due to some custody, tax, or legal ramification for them, even if they're in self-custody. And I think it's a big misunderstanding. A lot of people think I talk about the multi-sig stuff and, get your trusts down, get your tax planning down, get all that locked down right now. I think a lot of people think I talk about that on my YouTube and Twitter because, oh, he's just in it for the money and he's promoting that because it's in his financial incentive to do so, which they're not wrong. It is. But I'm more so doing that for my conscience, right? Like in 5 years, when Bitcoin has had major vertical green candles and 90% of the people from the class of 2017, 2021, 2024 have lost, 10 to 40% of their Bitcoin, right? It's like, I want to be the last guy people get mad at, right? Because I can tolerate a few people right now complaining, the same thing with orange pilling normies, right? Like I can tolerate the normies complaining about me trying to orange pill them because I do not want, like, it's not for them anymore. For me personally, it's not for my loved ones anymore. It is because I care about them, but at the same time, I'm doing it for my own conscience, right? In 2035, I don't want you to say, Luke, why didn't you warn me? I could have gotten 10 million sats and I didn't. Man, I wish you told me. I can, with a clear conscience, say, I tried every birthday, every major holiday. I sent you $5 of Bitcoin. You claimed it twice. out of the 20 times I sent it to you, I made hundreds of videos for free. You know, if you had listened, I want to have a clear conscience at the end of the day, because Bitcoin has given me a clear conscience financially. And the last thing I want is to feel like I could have warned people and I didn't. So that's true for the normies when trying to orange pill, and that's true for the Bitcoiners when trying to get them off the exchanges. And I've just had to accept that most of my Bitcoiner friends, most of the people that follow me online are probably going to lose a third of their Bitcoin. And most of the people I try to orange pill aren't going to buy until it's already $1 million. And they'll think I was an absolute genius buying it when it was literally almost 100 times cheaper, which is crazy for me to think about. But I think for everyone watching, that's probably how early you are to Bitcoin. Like literally, there are probably people in your life, your own personal life, that will not start buying Bitcoin until their first entry price for a significant buy is literally 100 times higher than what your buy initially was, which is crazy. But I think that's how it's going to work. I think it's going to be $2 million, and most people still will not have bought any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that at the point where we're seeing, I don't think a lot of people are going to be buying 100 times higher, because I think like 100 times higher from here, we go from, we go to 1 million to 10 million. And I think from 50 million to infinity happens quick.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like
Just to add to that, I mean,
Mhm.
my point there is that we're at 0.1% of global adoption, more or less. Right? I mean, we've gone from 20,000 to 100,000. We've increased 5x in price without having a 5x increase in adoption. Maybe we've doubled adoption, but even that is probably a bit optimistic. And my point is that a 10x from here is $1 million per Bitcoin. Many people watching this probably were buying at $10,000, so that would be 100x. For a lot of people watching, maybe they aren't starting buying until now, which, okay, fair enough. That's $10 million per Bitcoin. That's a 100x in users here. A 100x from 0.1% adoption is 10%. Like 10% global adoption is still not even the majority of America and the Western world. And I think that trend of percentage returns in price outpacing percentage returns in adoption, I think that continues. So let's say a 100x in price is reflecting a 15x in adoption, or even a 20x in adoption. That's 2%. That's 2% global adoption. Like I think we're going to be at $10 million Bitcoin, and we're at 2% or 3% global adoption, just because I think we're such a smaller percentage of what Bitcoiners say we are, right? Bitcoiners say, oh, we're at 10% global adoption and 5% global adoption. I just really don't agree with that. And everyone I talk to that I think is worth their salt in Bitcoin, I think would agree. Michael Saylor himself has said that he thinks we're at about that 0.1, 0.2% range. Jeff Booth and other people, I think the deeper you go in the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you realize that 1% of the world's population is 80 million people. There's not 80 million people in Bitcoin. There's not even 8 million people in Bitcoin, right? Michael Saylor is lucky to have 80 to 200,000 views on a popular YouTube podcast, right? It's like, anyway, all that to say is I think, I think, I know other times when I said, I think Bitcoin will be $5 to $10 million, and most people will have still not bought Bitcoin. I mean, I really think that's true, because I think just the bar is so much earlier and lower than what people expect that I think it's going to surprise people. Granted, I think it's going to take years for that to unfold. But yeah, I think it'll be late 2030s. Bitcoin's millions and millions of dollars. Most people will have bought $100 or so, but still the number of people that are actually using it as a store of value significantly or immediate exchange will still be, below 10% or something, right? Like I think it's going to be crazy. Because again, final point, internet is only at 60% adoption, right? It's like, like when Bitcoin is 60% adoption, it will feel like the whole world uses Bitcoin, right? In the same way that the internet is already such a big deal, it feels like the whole world uses Bitcoin, or you mean the internet, even though that's just not true. Barely half of the world uses the internet. So anyway.
Yeah. So for people who are newer to this, you haven't missed it. Moral of the story there. You haven't missed it.
Right.
Also, I guess orienting towards those newer to this a little bit, there's two things I'm thinking. First is that you've talked about the idea of part of what like helps you stay motivated to work so hard, which, from our interactions that we've had thus far, I notice you're someone who has that dog in them, as the kids would say. Like I notice you really seem to get after it. And you talked about how like people our age in decades or centuries past were spent weeks or months in trenches, covered
Yeah.
in blood, getting burnt to death and blown to bits and all these sorts of things, and using that frame helps you to continue to work as hard as you do on this in this, revolution. I think is maybe, you want to be delicate about the frame, but I think it's the correct
Right.
frame. Um
Yeah.
what so yeah, so for the people that are newer to this too, like what is Bitcoin revolting against? Like, what's wrong with fiat currency? And I mean, like, specifically from the ethical perspective. It's like, why is Bitcoin ethically superior? Why is it a system that's like better for humanity and like worth fighting for in that way?
Yeah. So Jake, you're a Christian, right? So, I'll be a little more overt here than typical, but I mean, the fundamental truth of the universe is that man is fallen. Mankind is not God. God made us in His own image, and we chose corruption. We chose sin. We chose the uh, knowledge of all good and evil, which is another way of saying sin. And Jesus is the light. Jesus is the Savior. He is the perfect sacrificial lamb, right? He is the ultimate proof of work, right? If you have a corrupted creature, it takes the same way it takes a literal infinite amount of energy to convert mass to have mass go at light speed, right? So it's literally physically impossible, right? You need an infinite amount of energy to reach the speed of light, right? It's an infinite, unachievable proof of work. It's the same thing with mankind being righteous, right? It's that it takes an infinite proof of work for us to undo the stain that is on our hearts, right? And so that's what Jesus is. Jesus is the perfect proof of work, right? To cover the corruption, sin in mankind, you need a perfect sacrifice, right? So that's what Jesus is. And my point in that is that, well, I'm not Jesus. I'm not God, right? You don't even have to be a Christian to admit that you're not God, right? No human being in the history of man, besides Jesus, is morally righteous enough to declare what the world's laws are, right? It's just man is incompetent. Man is not omniscient. Man has a corrupt heart, right? We may do righteous things. We may do good things, but just because someone does, some good works does not mean they're worthy, right? Again, you can go faster, but it takes an infinite amount of going faster to reach the speed of light, right? Or infinite amount of energy, I would just say, to reach the speed of light. So my point in all that is that, the main problem is corruption. The main problem isn't fiat money. The main problem is not even government. The main problem is sin and corruption. And what fiat money does is it gives the power of the equation that is monetary policy to human beings. And so, of course, obviously, if you give mankind the ability to print a fiat button, say, oh, on my decree, let there be light, let's create energy out of nothing in this zero-sum game aspect, which inherently has to take energy from the smallest users of the system and give it to the largest users of the system. That's inherently a zero-sum game. It's
What do you
inherently
mean when you say that? Like,
capitalistic.
how does fiat take from the smallest users of the system and give it to the greatest users of the system? What does that look like practically for people to understand?
Well, so at the time of recording, there's a major forest fire or now in the city going on in LA, right? 5 people tragically died in that event. As a piece of context, though, 340,000 people a year die from forest fires, almost all of them in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia. My point with that is that, when American property in Los Angeles collapses and 5 people die, we all freak out. As in many cases, we probably should, because this event seems to be preventable. But, we tend to forget about people in more poor places of the world, right? And my point there is that if Americans were to zoom out and realize what's actually going on, that's essentially what we're doing with fiat money, right? If America prints 5% more political currency units and exports those 5% political currency units to the rest of the world, onto the rest of the world, that means that we've effectively stolen some percentage, some sub 5% percentage, or maybe even not, because the assets appreciate faster than 5%. We have taken money from the developing world and imported it to the developed world without actually having to move raw materials. So, it's basically plundering without actually having to use force to take physical resources, just forced with standardizing, right? I mean, it's the same reason why meme coins are a scam, right? If I make a token out of thin air, I hold the majority of supply, I hold the control to create more supply, and I distribute that token to 100,000 people that are all holding it, saving in it. If I just print more tokens, I am printing myself into a larger percentage of the total supply. And so therefore I am printing myself into taking money from other people via a backhand, system, right? I'm not stealing people's political currency units, but I'm stealing the percentage of the network those political currency units represent. And so effectively it's the same thing. So inherently, fiat monetary system has to be a zero-sum game. It has to inherently steal from the poor to the rich, right? You can't have the poor steal from the rich, right? Not even that's ethical, but you can't even have it the opposite way. It has to be stealing from the poor to the rich, because the rich ones, the wealthy ones, are in charge of maintaining that currency system. That's how that system works. It's proof of stake. It's based upon who's the most powerful elite member. And there is a very real human cost associated with that. And the reason Bitcoin's important is because Bitcoin is a monetary system without that possibility for human distortion and control, right? Yes, humans made Bitcoin, but humans cannot manipulate that currency supply down or in particular up, right? So it's not only possible, it's inevitable. People will use Bitcoin for evil things. It's just a tool, right? People can use any tool for evil things, but the system itself does not have a built-in back-end button towards systemic corruption and systemic institutionalized monetary incentive to propagate sin, because that's essentially what fiat money does, right? There's a very clear reason why alcoholism, divorce rates, the purchases of lottery tickets, porn, drugs, there is a very startling realization most people have when they realize all those things and many, many more. Childlessness, right? The desire to not have kids, all those things, not just the cost of education and housing and food and energy, right? Not just that, but all those things I just mentioned, all of them have been rising dramatically, consistently since the 1970s. And there's many factors for that, but I think one of the largest factors, if not the initial factor for that, is that we created the highest monetizable technology on the entire planet, which is money. We have turned that into a system to accelerate incentives towards destruction and sin. And I think anyone that's not a Christian can still admit to themselves that they aren't God, right? At least if they're intellectually consistent. They should be able to admit to themselves that, and they should be able to admit, not even I am worthy to be in charge of the world's money. And for those that are Christians, I think the burden is even higher, because, God calls us to love our neighbors, and the most loving thing we can do for our neighbors is put them in an environment that does not have sin economically incentivized for them to do. There will still be sin, still be corruption. The world will still have its problems, and they, will still, need a savior. But I would rather see more people in a world where sin is not the most profitable business in the world. It probably always will be to some degree, but that is a hardly difference. The real problem is not the government, and the real problem is not your opposing political party color of choice. The problem is human corruption. If we didn't have human corruption, we wouldn't need to have this conversation. If we could trust human beings, we wouldn't need to worry about the Fed. We wouldn't need to worry about politicians, because they would do everything right, everything moral. But the problem is you can't trust people, and so you need a currency system that doesn't require that trust. And so I think the burden on Christians is very high, that, if you know, if you have faith in things not of this world, it's a pretty easy ask to ask you to sacrifice things of this world to work towards a paradigm that hopefully incentivizes people to have a longer term mindset. You know,
one of my like favorite metaphors or in this relating to this, I guess, is that I kind of walk people down this path using a Lord of the Rings analogy, essentially. But you know, we've all heard the idea that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it seems to me that the best proxy for power that humans have access to is money. And so when you give somebody limitless access to unearned power, you know, not that they've traded for, not that they've had some consensual value add relationship with, you give them limitless corruption. And then I, you know, you could say that what Satoshi gave us is the opportunity, if we so choose as a human collective, to take that one ring of power that is the money printer, to take that, you know, that corrupting force that people use to, you know, subjugate others rather than to engage in play, engage in consensual relationships, that we have the opportunity to cast it into the fires of Mordor by adopting Bitcoin, or you know, maybe or maybe we don't, you know, like we often talk in the Bitcoin space about like Bitcoin being inevitable sort of, and you know, I do lean towards this way of thinking, but nothing is guaranteed, nothing is inevitable truly, you know, like in some ways I think looking back we'll be like, oh, of course it was inevitable, but you know, it doesn't have to be. And there are real world scenarios that play out where, you know, where humanity misses it, I think, you know, where the adoption doesn't come to pass. I mean, I find it unlikely, but of course you have to consider the possibility. And you know, there's that world, you know, there were the dark ages in whatever, the first century into the second century, or yeah, the first millennia.
yeah,
And who's to say that we couldn't have a digital dark ages, so to speak, where maybe we miss it, and maybe you see like this, the sort of the sort of technology that allows for the sort of control that guys like Orwell and Solzhenitsyn and Aldous Huxley that they warned us about, you know, like, you know, or things like the technology that allows for control that's much greater than what they could have ever anticipated, you know, and we could, if we're not oriented properly, we could miss it, you know. And so that's part of, you know, there's that sense of urgency that comes with that.
Yeah, I would say I think Bitcoin's inevitable if it survives, right? It's not inevitable it survives. It could, as controversial as Bitcoiners may find it, like there is an N0 chance Bitcoin gets co-opted or destroyed. There is a tiny chance of that. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's an exceedingly low probability of happening. But if that were to happen, obviously it's not inevitable. If it remains decentralized and secure, then I think it's going to survive, right? And obviously, even if it was co-opted, that doesn't doom it forever. That may just push us back a decade or so, because really you can't destroy Bitcoin. You can just
There will
destroy
be
it.
another fork war. There will be. It will come.
There will be more forks. There will be more
BlackRock.
forks. That you
Yeah.
know, it's all the more reason why people should get off exchanges, even though 90% of them listening to this won't, because they have some sort of emotional block to doing that. But it's, you know, all the more reason we are going to have another fork that, you know, maybe it's a fork war, maybe it's a big fork. You know, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be for a while, but we know on chain there has to be more forks because there are bugs that need to be fixed. So there will be more forks. That is exceedingly high likelihood in a, you know, moderate time frame. But I think, to me, the thing I focused on more at this point in my story is less so will Bitcoin survive, but it's more so, you know, what's the world going to look like in the 20 years when Bitcoin's taking over, right? Like, you know, I think, being an optimist, Bitcoin becomes the world's monetary standard in 20 to 40 years, right? That would still mean Bitcoin adoption was significantly faster than the internet. So, you know, if we're looking at 20 to 40 years, right? You know, I think that's pretty optimistic. You know, that would mean this thing has changed the world in one working career. would be faster than the internet. But I think the thing that alarms me is that probably over the course of the next 20 years, we're going to have 100 million people die from fiat inefficiency that don't have to die, right? 6 million people a year die from pollution, 30 million people a year from forest fires, most of which are fully preventable for a wide variety of reasons. Every armed conflict in the world today is the result of state inefficiency, right? All famine today is a result of state
And
inefficiency, right?
protecting
We
the
have
reserve currency, like that's a big
right,
part of
right,
yeah.
yeah.
You
That's
don't
part of
trade
it,
your
right?
oil with, your own currency or yeah, a lot of it's tied up around that.
Yeah, that's a part of it, right? Whether it's famine, whether it's forcing energy prices up, and 3 to 4 million people a year freeze because energy is expensive, right? Housing being expensive is directly causing people to have less kids. It's one of the main drivers behind this fertility crisis, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we're easily looking at least 1 billion people that are not going to be born because of this inefficiency, and people that
Mm.
are born or preborn, I should say too, we're looking at least at a couple 100 million over the course of the next 20, 40 years are going to die, even if Bitcoin wins. And
'Cause
so,
people
at
can't
this
afford to
point,
have kids. So
right,
so
it,
that yeah.
right, people either don't have kids or they kill their kids before they're born, or the kids are born and they're blown up in some war, right? That is fully preventable. So, my point at this point is that, for most Bitcoiners, uh, at this point, my motivation is more so, how do we make the transition the least painful possible, and less so will Bitcoin survive or not, right? Which unfortunately, when I make content about the human perspective, people don't click on it, people don't care, right? I mean, literally the video performs 20 times worse. When I make a video about Bitcoin going up to a certain price point, that's when people care, right? So I mean, I get it, it's just where people's minds are. But I think on the surface level, what attracts most people is that number go up stuff. But if you actually want to have the incentive to make a bunch of money in Bitcoin and work your butt off in Bitcoin, I think quantifying that human cost is extremely significant. If let's say 10 million people are dying a year, they don't have to die. We're assuming a World War III doesn't happen, by the way. If 10 million people a year are dying, they don't have to die over the next 20 years, being the most optimistic we can with Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin can save just 10% of those lives, that's 20 million people, right? Well, there's not 20 million people working in Bitcoin today. Like literally the work we are doing today in Bitcoin is going to save lives, right? Let's say there's 1 million people in Bitcoin, working on Bitcoin full time, which aren't 1 million people, by the way. That's 20 people, right? And I'm not saying it to say, oh, I'm important, I'm saving lives, but that's to say everyone in Bitcoin today, I think, has a very real role. You are one of the 10,000 to 100,000 people accelerating this orange front line. And the work you're going to do today is probably going to save 10 to 20%, hopefully more, of the future lives, born, pre-born, yet to be born, already born. You're going to save probably millions of lives indirectly because of the butterfly effect of the actions you take today. And so, yeah, maybe Bitcoin's inevitable whether you help it out or not. But hey, if you help it out, you might literally accelerate Bitcoin adoption by another 6 hours or another couple days, right? Like literally my work at the Bitcoin Advisor, like I have personally helped overseeing the actions of self-custody for actually a non-trivial number of coins. And it's fun when I always divide the number of coins at exchanges by how many coins I have personally helped oversee get off the exchanges. And it's like, if you get a few thousand people doing what I'm doing, then great, the exchanges have run out, right? So my point is that I think at a certain point for most Bitcoiners, the motivation to work slows down because, oh, Bitcoin's doubtable, I don't need to do anything more. And they're not wrong. And like they probably deserve to slow down, right? I will probably slow at some point because they put in a lot of work. But that motivation for me continues in a large part, not because will Bitcoin succeed, but to what degree and what magnitude is fiat going to cannibalize itself on the way down? If we can turn 200 million deaths into 150 million deaths, then I think that's a huge win. That is preventing a significant portion of the largest humanitarian crisis in human history. And assuming there's 100,000 people working Bitcoin full time, I think it's possibly fair to say that literally you're doing life-saving work in the same way that a doctor might save a few lives a year, or a paramedic might save a few lives a year. Like, not only are you working in Bitcoin, doing something that's hopefully fun, doing something that's hopefully making you a good bit of money, but also ironically, you're probably saving lives or preventing death. Except the difference is that you'll never know who you saved. You'll never know when you saved them. You never know if you actually did. And you may not save a person today. You may save, some kid 55 years from now that you will never meet or never know their name. And so, it's why people don't like thinking that way. They'd rather just have the number go up, price stuff, because, we don't want to think in that more abstract sense. But yeah, just adding on to your point, I think, yeah, I felt like I should say that. And so I think we need to work as if it's as if it's life and death, because it isn't to us, right? We're here in America, or I'm here in America. You're not on the opposite side of the world of me. But to the majority of the world, it's either life and death for them today, or it could be for their kids. So, I think, we have the opportunity to work in Bitcoin. Most people don't. I saw a great post. Sorry, I'm going on a ramble here, but I think it's also important to mention, like, it is a luxury to save in Bitcoin, right? Like, many people in the world don't have the luxury to save money, right? 80% of the world's adults are making less than $30 a day, right? They don't have the ability to be saving $100 a month, or $1,000 a month, or $10,000 a month to buy Bitcoin, right? Like, the fact that we're having this conversation, we have the free time to talk about Bitcoin. That's a luxury. Like it is a luxury for people in Bitcoin to have the time to watch 10 hours of podcasts and YouTube videos a week, right? And all that to say is that, I'm not trying to force people into doing something out of a negative motivation here, but I am saying that you've got a great responsibility and opportunity here, right? If you have the fortune to be born in a place of the world where you have the time and the energy to sink capital into Bitcoin, into time about learning about Bitcoin and talking about Bitcoin, you are like perfectly poised to make a big impact. I know for me, I felt that way. A lot of it's the work I've done, but a lot of it is that God put me in the right place at the right time. And, I'm not lucky for the work I put in to Bitcoin, but I am lucky that I was born in the right place at time, in the right place and space to be able to capitalize on this. If I was born a couple years earlier or later, or if I was born in a different country, I wouldn't even have 1% of the Bitcoin I have today. All that back to MicroStrategy too is that's why I'm a huge fan of Michael Saylor. I have my disagreements with him. I think many people do, but there is no other human on the planet right now. I don't think Michael's a Christian. I don't know. Maybe he is. I don't think he is. But like, objectively, in my opinion, in my worldview, there is no other human being accelerating that route to minimal fiat destruction than Michael Saylor, because he is trying to orange pill the government. And, I think that's a huge win. Like, Michael Saylor literally, I think, is saving tens of thousands of lives, if not way, way more, like potentially millions, from the work that he's doing. Except, it's just a couple of decades earlier. Sometimes I say, working in Bitcoin is like fighting World War III 30 years before it happens. It's like, I think this is the closest to time travel we get. This is the closest you get. Yeah.
I think it was 9 of the last 11. This is from Ray Dalio's work. Something like 9 of the last 11. Weird his word for it, but when there's a rising power that passes a falling power, there was a violent conflict between the two 9 of the last 11 times, or something like that. And there's the work of the fourth turning, which I seem to bring up a lot in podcasts. Somebody mentioned to me, but if we're able to get through this fourth turning without that violent conflict, the probability of that is very low, from a historical perspective. But I think we've got the best shot at it of any of those times right now because of Bitcoin, and so there's that, the responsibility that we have. And also too, I think, like, there's a beauty in the fact that it's an emergent property instead of this thing that is being top down oriented,
Yeah.
structured.
Right.
And there's like, when you were talking, it reminded me of, I was doing some political work a few years back, and I was talking to some people in that arena trying to like kind of sell them on Bitcoin, and they mostly were not receptive to it. And this was like 2021 when I was like, oh my gosh, that's when it hit me. I was like, United States central bank is insolvent. Like, we will never pay our debts back. It's like, what does that
Right.
mean? Where is this going? And I was talking to politicians about it, or people in the political government world. And then it hit me that I was like, I don't know that they kind of weren't really receptive. And then I was thinking about it one day, and I was like, I don't know that I really want to orange pill these people first exactly. Not that I had any particular disdain towards them, but I was like, I have some friends. They have an account called Bitcoin Indonesia. I lived in Bali last year and met this crew, and they're awesome. And they're doing like great work where it's like, yeah, these are like unbanked people in Bali or across Indonesia or stuff like that. It's like, man, that like those are the people that we should be really trying to get the word out to, because Trump and the government's going to figure it out and that sort of stuff. But I think this, even what we're doing right here, what you do on your channel, this sort of stuff, that's like, yeah, this is available to everybody. I've grown to be more interested in that sort of approach than like, let me get the most powerful person I can on the phone and try to sell them, which, even though that probably would accelerate Bitcoin adoption faster, it's like, yeah, well, yeah, I think this is a better way to go about it, essentially. Last question for you. Go ahead.
In a way, it's like the gospel, right? God doesn't care if you're preaching the gospel to a billionaire or someone in poverty. Like, God doesn't need the money. Like God, Jesus makes that very clear. He doesn't need your money. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? And I think to a lesser degree, it's the same thing with Bitcoin, right? It's like God, if you actually believe God's in charge of the world, it doesn't matter who you're trying to orange pill, right? It's like, do what you can. Probably we are going to have violence. I think we will have a large amount of death in the next 20 years because of fiat shenanigans. I think historically, I think it's very likely. And unfortunately, because the world is so populated now, probably the numbers could be a lot higher than what we expect. I think the big question is just how many. Yeah. Is it going to be a full-out hot war between major economies, or is it going to be this slow bleed proxy war? Because I mean, like, we're already there, right? Like, everyone's so focused on Ukraine, Russia, Israel, and Iran, and whatever. Like, everyone's focused on those, but it's like, nobody talks about Ethiopia, nobody talks about Burma. People until a few minutes ago weren't really talking about Syria. Like even today, there are plenty of people, tens of thousands, 100,000 people every year that are dying, and so even if that were only double, that's still a significant number. So anyway, all I have to say is that, yeah, I don't think it matters who we're trying to orange pill. I think we should try to help everyone, we can't change the outcome. We can only change our actions. And I got to remind myself of a lot. And that gets back to the whole, how do you orange pill your loved ones point, is that you can't change what they do, but you can clear your conscience.
Yeah. You do your best. I think.
Yeah.
I think I often think, this is, so I have a bit of a psychology background, and when you're when you're working as a therapist, there's like if somebody's if somebody's not solving the problem that they're there to solve, you're not like, well, you're not listening to me. You're like, right. What you're thinking is like, okay, well, so how do I shift my approach to help this person understand? And you don't want to like give them advice. You want to help them sort out the problem themselves. You want them to come to their own conclusion. And so you're thinking like, okay, how can I shift my approach? If it hasn't been solved yet, then you think, how can I shift my approach? And I sort of think the same thing too, where I think a lot of times you get, for the most part, broadly speaking, I think you get like the respect you deserve. I think you get the trust you deserve, kind of. And there's outliers from that, for sure. But when it comes to, I try to think about that of like, okay, like, so if this isn't working, it's like, maybe they're stupid and maybe they should get it by now and maybe blah, 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 but it's like, if it hasn't worked, all right, how can I shift my approach? How can I do it differently? Because it's different for every person, This last question for you. It's so
Mhm.
straight out of Luke in the Bible, you know, in honor of the guest. Luke 16:13 says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And so the question for you to wrap up is how do you personally guard against Bitcoin becoming an idol in your life? And while you're fighting what we both agree to be a good fight, how do you try to balance that? Because I feel that tension. I feel that I wrestle with that all the time.
Yeah.
Of like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. I honestly, I don't know if I'm the best at that. Um, I work Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin. I've had dreams about Bitcoin. Um, Literally, I hear my alarm go off. I get to work. When I'm on a walk, I think about it. When I'm reading the Bible, I think about it. I mean, it is, you know, um, it for me, it has consumed my life. And part of that is that I'm incentivized to do that, right? I've got a team of 40 people at Bitcoin Advisor. People pay me to help them buy more Bitcoin. It's my job to help them think of their unknown unknowns, right? Which is again part of the reason why I strongly encourage people to think about their Bitcoin securities, because I've gone down this rabbit hole so far, and there's still so many risks. Everyone knows there's some threats to their personal Bitcoin stack, but it's like you could obsess about this over years, and you still find new stuff every couple of weeks. Oh my gosh, this is a new one. Oh, that's huge, right? So again, another reminder of that. But I
Maybe what would you do
point,
differently too if it's not what you've done already? If you're considering
well,
it now.
yeah, well, yeah. Point is just think about it. Most people in Bitcoin
Mhm.
have a job. I mean, I get it. Like they have a wife, they have kids, they have family, they have a business, trying to retire, whatever. It's like if you put in 5 hours a week to thinking about how can I improve my Bitcoin self custody to protect it against people that are going to sue me, people that are going to $5 wrench back me or my kids, which I think will. Both of those things are going to become likelihoods, right? Even if you only have half a Bitcoin, right? When Bitcoin's 10 million bucks, like really, you don't think anybody's going to try to come after $5 million of money that's untraceable? Like, come on, right? So I think most people in Bitcoin are not yet bullish enough on what they actually own. And my large point here is that I think likely to an unhealthy degree, I work, think, and obsess over Bitcoin. And even um, I put in 68 hours a week to this. My vacations are all for Bitcoin, right? Next week, I'm going on a month-long trip to South America, Colombia, Costa Rica, and El Salvador. Actually, a month and a half, truth be told. That's my vacation. But literally the whole time, I'm going to be with Bitcoiners, clients, doing podcasts, going to 3 different Bitcoin conferences. I mean, it's like my vacations are Bitcoin, my work is Bitcoin, my personal life is Bitcoin. I don't have a wife, I don't have kids. I mean, that's not something that I would prescribe, let's say. And all I'd say is that even if you obsess with Bitcoin to that, in my opinion, debatably unhealthy degree, you will still discover things about Bitcoin that terrify you, that most people are flippant about. So I know I'm not directly answering your question there, but I want to say that as a warning to everyone that the rabbit hole does not end. It really does not. But regarding Luke 16, I think what I would prescribe is to have a foundation in one that can save you. Bitcoin cannot save you, right? Like as much as I may to an unhealthy degree work and focus on Bitcoin, I know that it can't save me. Like Bitcoin,
Mhm.
I the rabbit hole also never ends when you look inwards at your own corruption and sin. The more I look at myself in the mirror, the more I'm like, ew, in a healthy way, right? Not in the self-shaming kind of stuff, but like genuinely, like I look at myself, I'm like, wow,
There's lots of work to
I'm,
do. There's
I'm
plenty
a
of room for improvement.
selfish, right? It's like, if we actually want to look at ourselves, typically we're not that thrilled with what we see, which is why we went to blame others, right? And so, I think even if you're going to think about Bitcoin all day, every day, just remind yourself, knowing that Bitcoin did not die on a cross for me. Bitcoin may fix the link between sin and institutionalized sin at the monetary level. Bitcoin may fix that, but Bitcoin does not fix the underlying problem. There's
a lot of things Bitcoin doesn't fix. Fixes a lot of things, but there's a lot of things it doesn't.
Well, the only thing that matters that it doesn't fix is sin. That's the only thing that really matters that it doesn't fix. Like if Bitcoin could fix sin, we wouldn't have a need for Bitcoin, right? Like if Jesus was only a moral figure, we wouldn't need Jesus. If Jesus was only a good teacher, we wouldn't need Jesus, right? We need ultimate proof of work, right? We need, because otherwise, if there isn't an ultimate proof of work, then the present and the future are bleak for all of us collectively and individually, not just in death, but in life. So yeah, I would say regarding that verse, I would say most people probably should not obsess over Bitcoin. They should obsess over Jesus. And I'm obsessed over him too, right? I mean, like I'm a huge nerd when it comes to lots of things, when it comes to the Bible and it comes to, understanding that. But, unfortunately, whenever I make a video about that, people don't care. In the future, I hope people care more. But, I do that more so out of practice, because I want to keep doing that to be in the practice of that. So all I have to say is that, Jesus isn't wrong. You can only serve one master, him or money. The love of money is the love of anything of this world, good or bad, right? If you love your wife more than God, that's basically the love of money, because money is the, fungible unit of account for this side of death, right? So anything that is loving itself, loving the things of this world, of this human side of the equation, over the one that made humans, right? That made you. Anything that's loving that more than God is that is the unforgivable. That is the unforgivable sin. All those sins are forgivable, but it is not forgivable to love something that is imperfect over something that's perfect. So I would say, for me, I love Bitcoin. I care about it a lot. It has changed my life. To a certain degree, I feel like I can't help but work in it. Like sometimes, I really wish I could just shut my brain off and just take a few days off. And that happens, but it's very hard to stop, and for a variety of reasons. But I do everything I can to stay on the path that is reminding myself why, right? Like, why am I working on this thing? It's about people. It's about sharing the gospel. It's about loving other people, showing them that I love them, right? So when you try to tell someone about Bitcoin, really what you're saying to them is, I love you, in a indirect orange way, right? And so
it's like the second tier gospel, I often say. It's like
because
people
I don't know.
you evangelize
The
about
gospel is infinitely more important. So I don't know.
Yes.
But I know what you mean.
Second. Yeah. But it's that same concept, right? Where you share the gospel with people, because you love them, you care about them,
right.
You want them to find the way, to understand the proper way of being, and to be able to embody it. I tweeted a while back. Go ahead.
In the end, our Bitcoin's not worth anything. We're all going to die. Maybe you can take your keys to heaven if you memorize them, but it won't buy you anything. So,
right.
So, So, I think we all just have to remember that. This idea that Bitcoin fixes your heart is just not true. It's not true. And anyone that thinks
there's this idea
is
of
naive.
There's the idea of time preference, right, in the Bitcoin space, and I remember I tweeted a while back, and it's comes to mind regularly of this idea that like the lowest time preference individuals concern themselves with eternity. So like once you understand, like, and I think Bitcoin does help people like lower their time preference. You look further out in the future, further out in the future, further out in the future. But if you continue doing that, if you go far enough, then it's like, oh yes, this is all. If you go all the way down that path, you should be concerning yourself with eternity. And ultimately,
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. I felt like when I came into the Bitcoin space, and I started rubbing shoulders with more of the elite soldiers in the Bitcoin space, kind of people like higher up the ranks. I felt convicted to be a reminder of like, this is a good thing, but it's not the good. This is a good thing, but if it's put in too high of a place, it's just money. It's great. It's really good money. We love it. Like two thumbs up. It's going to do a lot of good for humanity. It's really good at being money. It's good in that ethical sense. It's good in that technical sense, but it's not the good. And I felt that
Right.
convicted in that sense because the things that have been true about money for thousands of years continue to be true about money. The things that are true that is like stated in the Gospels about money, the things I've been going back through the Tao Te Ching, which is like one of the foundational texts of the Eastern world, and there's a lot of great bits about money that I read it, and it makes me think of Bitcoin and where to be careful of stepping into pits. But yeah, it's just I've seen what happens even in the Bitcoin space when Bitcoin itself is put in too high of a place, when there's that deification of it. There's Nietzsche talked about how when there's like the quote unquote death of God, in the sense that he described it, right, that people would become religiously political essentially, and that when there wasn't something filling that God shaped hole in their life, that the political would take that place. And
Right.
he predicted that would happen 150 years before we had the horrifying effects of communism that happened last century, and the
Yep.
100 million bodies or so that were a result of it. He predicted that. And I think I see a similar thing actually happen in the Bitcoin space too, where the people who are a religious, who it seems that Bitcoin turns into the religion for them. And it's quite concerning to me because I think it's so good that it's dangerous. Like we love it, right? It's a
Right.
great thing, but it's dangerous to where it's like, it's so good that people, it concerns me when I feel like it's put in too high of a place. And I feel like that's a bit of my calling, so to speak, is to like, I'm fighting for it tooth and nail, like I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of future catastrophe that could be avoided if we can get people to figure this out. And the sooner the better, man. As Lowry talks about, like for, people talk about Bitcoin wasting energy. And it's like, listen, if the electrical energy put into this can be a substitute for bloodshed that we've previously been using to establish the chain and custody of scarce resources, then like this is not a waste, man. And time spent that, like you mentioned, time spent that we have working towards that, it is a valiant, important thing to fight for. But everything in its proper place, essentially. That's something that I think we all, perhaps I think they're, especially for those of us who are Christian Bitcoiners, it's like in that order, like you know yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so yeah, I think
It's
that go ahead. Yeah, I just think that that's something I want to like keep front of mind for myself, remind people of around me in the space too. It's like, remember, yeah, let's keep what's highest in the highest place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another layer of the onion, right? We want to save people that aren't orange pilled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Within that, we want to save the people in Bitcoin from losing most of Bitcoin, because most people in normie world are not going to get Bitcoin until it's already down another 95%. Most people in Bitcoin are probably going to lose a significant fraction and go through a lot of pain of what they've already got. We're trying to save the lives, the humanitarian case, but the core of that all is what you're saying, is that we're trying to show people that this tool is amazing and it reflects a beautiful maker but you know, it's not God, right? If Sakamoto convicted Bitcoin, but if he condemns Jesus to death, he is deserving of hell. And when we reject Jesus in favor of our own moral law, that's essentially what we're doing. We're condemning him to death ourselves, which is again the unforgivable, unforgivable action, the unforgivable belief. Which not my word that says that, it's his word, So, many different layers to why we do this. I think hopefully that's the antidote for loving Jesus and not money, is remembering that in the end, it's all nothing, right? People want to know how much Bitcoin does it take to get rich? Well, really nothing. The person with nothing that has Jesus is infinitely richer than the person with 1 million Bitcoin that doesn't have them. Maybe their life's not as comfortable. But
some people are so poor, all they have is money.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The thing that makes me the most optimistic in the world is when I see a Bitcoiner come to Jesus, because I think that's very, very optimistic for the future. Because billions of people are going to use Bitcoin. And so if Bitcoin helps people find Jesus, then that's great. But and thank God that actually happens a good amount. I see. But
does seem that way.
This is why Jesus warned about wealth, or the desire for wealth, is that it's very hard to look in the mirror and see your own flaws when your life is so comfortable that you can afford to ignore it and be distracted. So thank you for going this route and having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it's been great to talk. I really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we'll have another chat sometime in the not too far off future. With what you said about the self-custody stuff, so you worked at the Bitcoin Advisor. How could people reach out to you about that so they can improve their custody situation? And also, where else can people find you online?
Yeah, they can text me. My phone number is because I'm American, 317-777-1020. People just text me their name and what they're trying to do. They can find me a YouTube channel, Luke Broyles, Broyles. Lots of links. My email address, my phone number, all that's on there. People can get a hold of me. The big encouragement is just people need to have that conversation, because most people have only put 100 hours of work into thinking about that, when really they should be putting thousands. Because if you don't, a malicious person is going to do that, and the person that puts in more work is going to get it. It's this whole self-custody thing is not a set it and forget kind of thing. We gotta stay vigilant in all aspects, right? So yeah, people can find me on Twitter. They can find me on YouTube. Best way to get a hold of me is email me or text me, both of which you can find on YouTube or Twitter. So, yeah.
And for those who don't have thousands of hours to allocate to that, you can pay somebody a couple $100 or whatever it is, and they can help you out because they've had the time to do that. So when it comes to hundreds of thousands of hours of your time.
Yeah, to do it right, it'll take more than $100, right? You don't want to protect $10 million with a couple $100.
Yeah. So, well, 5 to whatever. I mean, even a single 60-minute conversation will
right.
There's a lot. There's a lot of benefit people can get from that. That's for sure. So, and probably more time than that should be allocated.
Yeah, definitely. Which I think is true. We've less in common with the future of the past, and hopefully that's a good future. And hopefully we all take actions to make that as positive as possible.
Luke Broyles, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jake.